I'm here with Kamyl Bazbaz, the VP of Communication at a company called DuckDuckGo. If you're not familiar with DuckDuckGo, they're a search engine. They're a competitor to Google and Bing and other search engines out there, except they have a focus on privacy, which Camille will talk a lot about, I'm sure, as we do this episode. So, first of all, before we get into anything, Camille, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited to have you here, especially on the first episode where we're doing video in addition to the audio. This is like a almost a trial run. This is the first time I've done it with a guest, so hopefully it comes out okay. But Camille,
I,
how did
I,
you?
I was aware
Yeah,
of this. I prepped. I got my hair ready, as everyone
it
can,
looks
can, can
great. By
probably
the way, it
see.
looks really good.
Thank you so much. It's not as impressive as yours, obviously, but I've not been able to really make it impressive in many years. So, at least I'm
Well,
not wearing a hat.
your beard looks good. So I mean, we could
Thank
be
you.
like we could be
Thank you.
like beard twins or something.
Exactly. A quarantine beard twin, too.
Exactly. Well, Camille, thanks again for being on. I want to jump into this episode by asking about a little about who you are, what you do at DuckDuckGo on a day to day basis. What does your daily day look like? What do you do every day?
Great question. It's funny answering that question because I think there's been funny coverage about this, but like everyone's spouses in this moment have been like, "Oh, that's what you do now that we used to spend all your time together." So like, what does a communications person even really
You
do
couldn't do
in
that at
one
home
moment?
before.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so every day is different at DuckDuckGo, but our mission as a company is to raise the standard of trust online. And it's my job to communicate that to people all over the world, that they can have privacy online, even though a lot of folks feel trapped by the default settings, by their existing experiences on the internet. Privacy is possible. And so it's really my job to come up with interesting ways to talk about that, and get it talked about. But really, no 2 days are different. It's a super interesting and exciting time to be working on issues like this, given that privacy and antitrust are basically the two most talked about topics in tech right now.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned the default settings, and I just want to talk about this real quick. I feel like a lot of these companies bank on default settings and the fact that most people don't change them, right? I mean, that's how Microsoft Bing is actually still in. People use it because it's the default when they set up their Windows computer. Um, how do you think about it? How does DuckDuckGo think about it in terms of how maybe convincing these people that it's a good
Yeah.
idea to switch?
Well, so, when you're talking about the default, there are a few things at play. One is the default has been used to suppress competition in our point of view. Just this morning we talked. We put out a blog post, sort of explaining how many steps on Android it takes to make another search engine other than Google the default search on the device. And it's more than 15 steps.
Wow.
It's complicated
Wow.
because it's not just about changing your default search engine within Chrome, right? That's sort of one way to do it. But on Android devices, you also have the sort of global search as a part of the
Hmm.
widget on the home screen. And so, in order to change that, it's a totally different process that requires you download the DuckDuckGo app to even have the ability to do it. And so, you know, we think setting up those kinds of barriers make it harder for people to switch. And as a result, there is a ton of pent-up demand from consumers for different options that they feel like they simply don't have access to now. Google likes to say that competition is one click away and that they don't lock um, users into using their product. But, it's a sort of cute thing to say when, maybe that one click is just the last click. And so, even though it's possible, doesn't, and, that possibility is preserved because of the legal ramifications that it would have if it didn't. But just because it's possible doesn't mean it's easy or that they're, encouraging people to do it. Um, you know, Setting up all those steps, I think, inherently warns people that it feels like it's something bad to do. And so, we think there shouldn't be search defaults. And, we think that the best kind of remedy to solve this is to really give power to the people and sort of let them be the monopoly busters in this case by setting up a preference menu, which is a one-click process to pick your default search engine on any device or any browser. By making it easy and giving a quick description of what your options are, we think people will choose um, other options besides Google. We've run our own user tests on this ourselves and found that at least 20% of people would choose a alternative other than Google. And when you look at, Google's market share, which they obviously refuse to talk about, they would never mention themselves. This has been well reported that it's sort of like a, sort of like a boogeyman thing,
Hmm.
that they just won't say it. But if you look at the external reporting on it, you know, it's on mobile, it's upwards of 95%, basically all around the world. And so 20% off of that is really significant, and could make a huge difference.
Absolutely. I mean, it's reminiscent to me of the time. I mean, this didn't happen in the U.S., but in the EU, they had a preference screen
Right.
for Microsoft, right? I mean, so yeah, go ahead.
That's right. No, I was just going to say that that's completely right. That preference screen, for Microsoft on Internet Explorer, we think is sort of the right way to design these things. There's also a preference menu currently in effect in the EU on new Android devices. But the process to appear on that preference menu, we believe, is basically rigged to benefit Google, because it gives advantages to companies that put profit over privacy and people's and just people overall. And so, we have been kicked off of that preference menu that's currently happening in Europe, because we were priced out of continuing to participate in it, not because we don't have the money. And at this point, we could definitely overpay to be on it, but it's just not a sustainable business proposition for us and other independent competitors. And, why would we sort of give all of our profits to Google when something like this shouldn't be a sort of pay for play situation?
Right. Absolutely. I mean, so ideally, what would you guys like to? What would you guys at DuckDuckGo like to see? A preference screen? How should it be set up in a way that is fair for competitive reasons, but also just more pro consumer?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, this can get in the weeds, so Jeff, stop me at
Hmm.
any moment. Yeah, it's all really funny because these debates and conversations are really important to have, but I think at the end of the day, most consumers are just saying to themselves, I want privacy. Like, I don't necessarily care about, how the antitrust remedies come into place, right? Do we start a new, if we're talking about the United States, do we start a new agency or do we increase funding for another one? Do we break up Google or do we not break up Google? All of those processes will take forever, will require a lot of time and money. And,
And
for the
lawyers.
Department of Justice, right. So, like,
Yeah.
if the Department of Justice is going to pursue this for the next 2 years, that's our taxpayer dollars at work. And so, you know, we don't think that the American people are particularly interested in how that plays out. What they do want is more privacy. They've made that clear in sort of study after study. And, we think everyone is entitled to, access to a private internet experience if they want it. People can choose what they want, and, that's all good. But to sort of block access to something like that, we think isn't fair. And so, I don't want the sort of will of the consumer to be sort of overshadowed by a sort of antitrust policy debate. Nonetheless, when it comes to the preference menu, a few things we would do differently from what's currently existing in the EU. More than four options, right? So currently on that preference menu, you have Google and three others. It creates a sense of artificial scarcity, which is completely unnecessary because there are a lot more competitors out there. So include all the ones that meet either a certain market share threshold, or are the ones that sort of users request the most, but don't cut it off, unless you sort of really need to at a certain point. But there's no reason for there just to be four. Two, we think it shouldn't be an auction. Shouldn't have to pay for that spot. It should just be a sort of option for anyone to pick, and the sort of auction nature of it artificially drives up the prices, and get into auction theory, but all that's not so important.
Yeah.
The other thing that's interesting about it is if you pick a search engine now on that preference menu, and let's say you want to pick a different one after trying it out, you can't see that preference menu again. You will not have the option. And
That
what's
I wasn't
interesting
aware
about
of.
yeah, and what's interesting about the preference menu in Europe is sort of like, if you think about what I was saying earlier with regards to changing the widget and also changing the default browser in the default search within the browser, the preference menu now changes all of that all at once. And so it's a lot easier, and that's sort of the point. But you can't go back to that ever. So it's just a sort of one-time thing. You would have to sort of clear your phone and restart it in order to get a preference menu again.
Gotcha. So it's really not much of a choice at the end of the day, right? It's like, I mean, I guess if I'm not familiar with that preference screen in terms of how it actually looks.
Hmm.
But I'd imagine that the need for not just a logo and click which one you want, but here's some information about each service, and so here's some information about Google, here's some information about Bing, here's some information about DuckDuckGo, type of thing, and give the
Exactly.
consumer a kind of like picture of what which they're choosing, and which one they actually want to pick.
Yeah, we sort of have done a side by side of our proposal and theirs. And if folks are interested in checking it out, they can just go to our blog, which is called Spread Privacy. So spreadprivacy.com. And there's a whole series on the preference menu where folks can look at our recommendation, what's already in there, what are the differences. And one of those differences is exactly that. What information is sort of listed under each search engine as an option. And Google had tried to kind of limit how much information was there. So maybe it just said um, it just said the name of the competitor and not actually what they do or their tagline or something. Or you had to sort of click on it in order to learn more, instead of just kind of having it all in
Mm-hmm.
one easy screen. And I think one other thing, just to add on this, is like, you know, it is not as if you need to like opt into any of Google's behavioral tracking or data collection, right? So it's not as if they don't know how to make things easy. They might be the best at making things easy, right? Like they really know how to do
Absolutely.
that. It takes 15 clicks to switch. It takes 0 clicks to be a part of the, data collection and behavioral targeting and
Yeah.
all this other stuff. And so, they know what seamless means and how to make it easy. And this is done on this. It's hard to think anything else besides them doing this on purpose.
Yeah, so I mean, I'm listening to you and I'm thinking like you and your colleagues live this every day, right? I mean, like this is your job, obviously. So you guys are living this it must be extremely frustrating for you guys, I would imagine, just trying to deal with this cuz you from a growth standpoint at least among other reasons, trying to get consumers the best possible product and get your product in front of them in a way that's more fair. Just
Hmm.
from a company perspective, I feel like it's got to be kind of frustrating that you guys have to. You have created a great product that has usage and market share, and people use it. In fact, at full transparency, I've recently switched to DuckDuckGo as my main search engine several months ago. At this point, I haven't
Hmm.
looked back. But but while I had known about DuckDuckGo before, I never made the switch until months ago, and it's been
Yeah.
around. So just clarify, how long has DuckDuckGo been around for starters?
It's been around for 13 years.
Okay, yeah,
And so, I think in sort of answering your question around, is it frustrating? I think, you know, w one of the reasons why I wanted to work here and admired the company overall is because it was never really about Google alone, right? So
hmm,
like I think it was never the priority to sort of make that uh, you know, the message or the thing. We have to sort of topple Google. Um,
right, and I don't think that that would be a good messaging campaign just to make it the only thing, right? I mean, that doesn't look good from your end, but yes, yeah,
right. But it's also nice that that's the truth, right? That
hmm,
I think for us, it's not as if we're waking up every day thinking how, what did Google do to us today?
right.
It's more so we're waking up thinking, how
What are we
can
gonna do?
we,
Yeah,
yeah, what are we going to do? How can we educate people about their privacy online? So much of what happens with regards to people's personal data happens with no trace, right? There are no, if you know, if if someone wants to say that their data was stolen, right, it would be kind of a perfect crime
hmm,
because there's no break-in, there's no footprints, right? Like very, very hard to see these things. And because you can't make it tangible, there's kind of a
right.
what's the big deal?
Right. It's
I always
almost
think of
as
it.
if
Sorry.
no, I was just gonna say. I mean, it wasn't until relatively recently that these companies started allowing you to download what they call your data. But obviously,
Right,
that's not all they have on you. There's no way that's all they have on you. And
right,
everything. And if you don't even know what all they have on you, how can you know what's been stolen in the first
right,
place?
right,
Right.
exactly.
So yeah.
Yeah, and it's all this sort of, you know, I think one thing that's sort of interesting to me is, and I'm sure you friends who do this or know people do this, but how people will put a post-it note over their camera on their
Hmm.
laptop.
My wife
Uh,
has a piece of
you know,
tape over her webcam camera.
right,
Yeah.
reasonable, worth doing, but at the same time, you might still be using Google, might still be using Facebook. That is a daily threat to
Yeah.
your privacy, but also a sort of threat to, democracy, to society, and it's helping polarization and spreading misinformation. And so, the act of putting that post-it note feels really tangible, but there isn't really an equivalent for data
Right.
and privacy. And so one of the things we're trying to do is how we can make that more tangible to people, but also I think, not lead with fear,
Hmm.
and let people understand that it is not their fault that they feel this way online, that this has been the result of the internet being really sort of overrun by companies that have made it their business model to track everything you do to be in your business, and you know, which leads to manipulation, polarization, all these other things that we talked about. And so, that sort of helplessness, this sort of resigned acceptance that can happen when you're thinking about these things, you know, we want to make sure folks know that that is sort of not their fault. That is sort of what they have been made to believe, and that there are other options.
Hmm. So I want to talk about privacy and misinformation a little bit, and disinformation. So, which
Hmm.
is something you just highlighted. So people, let's say people wake up today and they're thinking about all these things that we're talking about. The
Hmm.
fact that there's not a lot of choice in terms of well, there is choice, but it's not really readily made aware to people, or made
Hmm.
convoluted in the sense that it's hard to
It's
find.
not simple. Yeah.
And that there's just so much information out there, both good and bad in misinformation. Good
Hmm.
information and misinformation, bad information, whatever. Um, how how does what you guys at DuckDuckGo are building and talking about and kind of envisioning with privacy help um, stop the spread of this kind of misinformation, and also just how does it make the web kind of a better place for people?
Yeah, I think the way to understand this is to understand that the core problem, the sort of original thing through which all these other bad things happened, is this sort of endless data collection that was really kind of unleashed on the world through Google search, and then sort of taken in a thousand other directions. But I think in the example that you're talking about, really done by Facebook, that's had a ton of negative effects. So the same technology, same sort of algorithms, the same way that ads are targeted for individuals based on what they clicked on, their purchasing history. Now there's so much more data connected into that. But that same data set and algorithm is also suggesting content for people to read, right? Every click represents money for these
Mm-hmm.
companies. And so that's where you get into sort of filter bubbles on Google search. And then just, I think what people have described as like alternate universes on Facebook, right? So, if you log on to Facebook and, you've clicked a number of similar things, you're going to get content that Facebook thinks you're interested in and that you're going to want to click on. And naturally, that's going to get more and more extreme, because that's the stuff that does well. And that's the stuff that keeps people clicking.
It happens on
And
YouTube
the
too.
long
You can go down YouTube rabbit holes.
100%,
Yeah.
same exact thing, same exact thing. And then before you know it, like this sort of rabbit hole thing, you
Mm-hmm.
spent all this time reading something, and, you know, uh, uh, you can find yourself living or sort of feeling like you're reading news that's like just tailored to sort of like agree with you and to sort of like get you to want to read more news. And
Which is
it's a
exactly
really,
what's happened. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
which is a really sort of problematic thing. Um, and I think a lot of this gets back to just concepts of freedom and democracy, because at the end of the day, the point of building up these massive troves of data is to reduce um, any sense of uncertainty with regards to what the user is going to do. All of this is meant to increase certainty, right? So if I know as much as possible, I'm going to know exactly what the user is going to do. But it's not a crystal ball, it's manipulation, right? Like, it's not as if they've collected all this data and it's like, oh, I know what they're going to do next. No, it's, I know what to show them in order
Right.
to get them to
You're
do
right. You're
something.
right. Yeah.
And so, like, the sort of magic of it is much uh, easier to understand than people think, you know?
Hmm. So lay it out for us. What is the difference between, let's say, me searching on Google for something versus me searching on DuckDuckGo? What data are you not, or do you know that you're not collecting from me? I mean, obviously, we don't know everything that Google collects. Maybe I don't know if you guys have more insight on that
Right.
than we do, the normal people. But what are you not collecting? And why, and how, and why should we feel good about that?
Yeah. So, every time you search on DuckDuckGo, it's like the first time. There are no usernames. You don't have to log in anywhere. If you ask me how many users we have, I'd say we don't know because we don't. It's not something that we track. And we know how many times someone's hit enter in the search
Hmm.
bar. And these days we're averaging around 73 million a day for, almost like 2.5 billion a month, sort of breaking records every
Hmm.
week, which is great. So growth is really, really steady, which is awesome. But the difference is, I think there is a way to describe this that's sort of like a list of things, and then there's sort of a feeling. The feeling people talk about is freedom, right? Like that moment when you get into the search bar and you're going to type something in, maybe it's a little personal, maybe something you'd even want to look over your own shoulder before you write it in case anyone's walking by your desk or whatever, even though we don't work in offices anymore. Um, but that feeling goes away with DuckDuckGo. This idea, these sort of chilling effects that, end up altering someone's behavior because they think they're being watched, um, go away. And I think that sense of freedom is really, really valuable. And it comes from the fact that we're not collecting any personal data or doing
I
any
wanna
tracking
highlight
of our
something.
users.
Yeah, I want to highlight something that I think it might be a good kind of analogy for this.
Hmm.
So when Google announced Google Chrome many, many years ago, one of the features that they talked about was incognito mode. And one of the things you just brought up was the fact that you could go in DuckDuckGo and type in whatever search you want, and it's not going to track you. It's not going to say this is now associated with this account or this person or what have you.
Hmm.
Whereas with Google, they're like, well, if you have to search, let's say you have foot fungus, I think was the example that they used back then. I don't ask me why I remember that. I don't know.
Right.
but but basically,
Yeah. I will not
you
read
could
into it.
go you can go you can go into DuckDuckGo and you can type that in without having to open an incognito window and feeling weird about it. Is what you're saying, correct?
Right. Well, here's the thing though, is like incognito mode was never private,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
that's why there's a $5 billion class action lawsuit against Google about Google tracking
Mm-hmm.
people within their
Incognito
own
mode.
in yeah, exactly. And so, why should there be an incognito mode, right? Like,
Why does it
why
have
should
to
I
exist? Right. Yeah. Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
It should be the default, right? We don't have an incognito mode on our mobile browser because that's the default. Why do you need to sort of like express a want for privacy? This is something everyone
Should just have.
um, should just have. I think other things to think about with that is, there have also been a lot of surveys that said, you know, people don't think the risk reward is worth it. The sort of like personalized ads, for example.
Yeah.
Um, I think the personalized ads at this point, in particular when they follow you around the internet, is a really unwelcome thing. Second thing I'll say on that is you don't have to collect all this data on people to serve a relevant ad. The way DuckDuckGo does it is, you know, if you search for a Jeep, you get a Jeep ad. It's just that simple, right? Like
Contextual.
there are exactly the
Which is
context.
actually how the internet really used. I mean, that's how Google used to pitch a lot of their ads.
Exactly. That's right.
That when they
Yeah,
first
and
started, that's what it was. It was contextual
totally
advertising.
right. And so, that's sort of why, so much has changed and evolved and gotten worse, sort of without people fully realizing what's happening underneath the surface. And so, yes, we are, healthfully profitable and through contextual advertising, and it works. So it is not as if without that, people don't have an option. And, the sense of, oh, you know, if if we're going to be private, we have to charge for it because there's no way we can make enough money. Not only is this coming from the richest companies in the world, so, you know, excuse
Take
me,
that
but
with what you
uh,
will. Yeah, a grain of salt.
right. But like you can still be very profitable without taking all this, personal data.
I I I wonder, and I feel like, I mean, so obviously these companies are have record profits, like Google, for example,
Hmm.
and they're continuing to make more money based on the data they're collecting on people. Uh, and and as you noted, that there is, you can still build a really great business without using that. Now,
Hmm.
I'm curious if you have any thoughts in terms of, if they let's just say they went back in time and they're like, we're going back to contextual advertising and we're not using personal information anymore to target people. How much do you think they would lose money? Like, or because of their scale, and do you think that they would, uh, based on what you've seen at DuckDuckGo?
Well, the
I know it's hard. It's a hard question.
yeah, no, it's a hard question to answer, but I think the extent to which, there is this sort of like data futures market,
Hmm.
where people are constantly bidding, buying, and selling people's
They would
data.
lose out on that for sure.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah.
However, it would still be making money hand over fist,
Hmm.
it is not, it's hard to say one way or another, but um, you know, no matter what, it's still the sort of GDP of many
Hmm.
countries we're talking about.
I'm just gonna go ahead and say it. I'm not gonna make you say it, but it's corporate greed. It seems, based on some of this information. It's just ways to extract as much money from people as possible, and that's kind of what these companies have become. And why I really like DuckDuckGo is because for the 13 years that this company has been in existence, it hasn't changed its core values or focus,
Right.
despite everyone else doing it, despite the fact that they haven't grown as fast as some of these other companies, but I think, and the reason why I think you're seeing the growth that you talked about, that you guys are seeing more recently, is because of that. Because of the fact you guys have
Hmm.
stuck to your values, and people realize what is going on. They're waking up to this, this idea that, well, privacy is important. Why isn't
Right.
privacy the default? Why
That's
does it
right.
have to be a secondary option?
That's right.
Yeah.
And we have tried to expand what we do beyond search, and we're trying to position ourselves as a sort of easy button for privacy, which is, through not just search, right? You can search with DuckDuckGo and search privately, but through our browser extension and mobile app, you can also browse privately. And so you're really getting a far more private experience than you would otherwise. Um, our browser extension and mobile app um, have tracker blocking built in, and we feel like we have some of the best tracker blocking on the market. Um, that also is specifically making sure that your experience browsing isn't affected, right? So the more sort of uh, blocking and sort of other things you would do to protect your privacy can start to lead to some breakage in your experience online. And so we've sort of built all of our privacy protection tools so that there aren't any trade-offs, right? It's not like, oh, if I'm going to be more private, my experience is going to be different this way. it's really sort of consistent and the same throughout. As we like to say, the same internet, but more privacy. In addition to tracker blocking, you get more encryption. We have this sort of dashboard for people to see all the companies we caught tracking them and trying to get their information, and we stop those trackers before they even load. And so we've, definitely tried to grow the types of privacy protection that we give folks, and definitely going to have some new stuff in the future.
Nice. I want to shift gears a little. I want to talk a little bit more about search, but more specifically, search results, which are
Hmm.
a huge deal.
Yeah.
Because without good search results, you know, people
No
wouldn't want to
thanks.
wouldn't want to use the service, because
Yeah.
they wouldn't be finding what they're looking for. So I guess the question is how, to most people it's going to be, how does DuckDuckGo search compare to Google search in terms of the results?
Yeah. Yeah.
What
I mean,
how do you answer that for people?
the way I answer it for people is to ask them, what are you searching for?
Hmm.
Right? Because at the end of the day, most things you're looking for, you kind of know what you're looking for, right? Like if you're trying to, research someone before you interview them, you're going to try and look for their LinkedIn, blah, blah, blah. So like, what websites you're looking for. And I think people have this impression that Google is surfacing a needle in a haystack every time, and that they're the only ones that can do it, when it's just not the case, right? Like, I think we use search as a convenience at the end of the day, right? Like, we could have just gone right to LinkedIn, or, right to the Times or the Washington Post to sort of read an article, but we're going to put it into search because it's a little easier and it's less typing.
Hmm.
And so this idea that like search results are like radically different and one is far less helpful than the other in this case doesn't really make any sense. I think, you know, the most probably tangible difference is a lack of filter bubbles on DuckDuckGo. And so, I think it is unclear. We ran a study on this a few years ago, and as we understand it, Google's search results are influenced by your IP address and where you are, um, and with that, you're going to get different responses based on who is doing a search. For us, no matter who does the search, you're going to get the same responses. And so, it is not sort of tailored to sort of what Google thinks you're going to click on. And as the markup and other great publications have, reported, Google is also preferencing its own platforms and its own search results.
Absolutely,
And
and
I
doing
think
more so in doing that more so even in recent years, adding more
exactly.
Google kind of markup to each search result. The actual search results have continued to be moved down the page further and further.
Exactly. There are more ads, yeah. So that experience is in some ways going in a direction that consumers are not happy with. And more they've made that clear. DuckDuckGo has instant answers. We've built in a lot of the features that people have come to expect. We have private directions, which is interesting. And we just announced this last week, actually, through an integration with Apple Maps. You can now get directions on DuckDuckGo. And,
Awesome. I didn't
even
know
though,
that.
e-
That's awesome. I'm gonna start using that.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's more sort of like route planning. So it's not necessarily something you can, put in your car and
Hmm.
have it direct you. But to get directions, um, privately, um, is a huge consumer benefit,
Hmm.
and is really exciting. So we're trying to, and we have put a ton of other features that makes it, just as good as any other search engine.
Very cool. So one of the things I was thinking about in terms of the search results, and I've written about this as well, is that for some reason, and I don't know why it happens, and it doesn't happen for every tech query, but usually if I'm looking for information about technology, usually it's regarding like a tech support thing, like there's a problem with a piece of hardware or software, and I'm googling it or I'm DuckDuckGoing it, and on DuckDuckGo the results usually are okay, but I've had better luck on Google. For the
Hmm.
only those specific types of queries though. But I have to preface though that recently when I was searching um, for for new podcast equipment and researching the gear, I used DuckDuckGo exclusively for that, and I was able to find exactly what I was looking for, all the information I needed to make my
Awesome.
decision. But
Hmm.
I'm just curious if that's something you've heard from other people, or because I've seen it mentioned on Twitter a few times, but I'm not sure if
Yeah.
that's a common thing that you've heard about.
I mean, look, I think everyone has their own sense of like what convenience is. And, like you finding exactly the podcast equipment you want on DuckDuckGo, if someone else did the exact same search, they might have come back and said, I could not find the perfect
Mm-hmm.
podcast equipment. So it is hard to, we absolutely hear from people who were not able to find what they were looking for, but, you know, it is not necessarily a reflection of the quality of the search engine as much as
Mm-hmm.
someone, like, maybe they did a pretty unique search and had to click around a few times. And, you know, I think it's really easy to kind of complain about these things, um, and convenience overall when, the benefit of privacy, I think,
Mm-hmm.
can really kind of outweigh a lot of those other things. But, I think suffice to say, I would put our search engine on par every
I,
day.
I I
Um,
would too, and that's why I've continued to use it. There's, like I said, it's only been very rare instances where this has happened, where I was spending time on DuckDuckGo first because that's what I use most of the like all the time, except if I
mhm,
absolutely can't find what I'm looking for, and that was the case. It was just that one. It was just a few times searching. It was very technical kind of stuff. It might, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know, but I overall am very happy with the search engine. I would put it on par with other search engines out there, including Google, and I think that
mhm.
99% of the time I find what I need using the search, and it's completely private, which is great. I want to ask you before we start rounding this down, and I love the conversation so far. We didn't even get to hit on all the things I wanted to talk about, so we might have to have you back at some point.
Okay.
Um, but I'm curious, like, so what's a cool feature of DuckDuckGo that you wish more people knew about?
I think a core feature, I mean, I would say
Core or
that their
cool or
privacy.
both?
Oh, okay, sorry. I might have misunderstood. Um, I think bangs are really cool as a feature. This is sort of a really easy way where if you do want to, search directly somewhere else or like on Amazon or something like that, you can sort of do a exclamation point and then a short abbreviation in your search, and it'll search there automatically. So that's really cool. And then I think directions, as I was just talking about, I think is awesome, and sort of like, the next best thing that we've put out.
Mm-hmm.
But there are so many cool things we have in the works that I'm excited about, and excited hopefully as the next time to be able to come on and talk about. Um, but I think the stuff that we're doing within our extension and browser are also really cool. Every time I've sort of taken someone on a test drive of the mobile browser, for example, and showed them how many companies were tracking them, there's consistently a shock and awe at this. Like, oh my God, I had
Yeah.
just no idea. I've never even heard of these companies. And so, I would encourage folks trying us out to really look into that privacy dashboard, to have a better understanding, and also to feel like that they've done something proactive to protect themselves online.
Definitely. I would say for me, as a geek myself and like total nerd when it comes to this stuff, there is a feature on DuckDuckGo. If you dive into the preferences when you're searching, you can make the search results, everything on DuckDuckGo look like a computer terminal. It's really cool.
Hmm.
I think that's one of the
Yeah.
probably unknown features that most geeks would probably like to check out at least once, I was sure.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I'm so glad that you like have taken some time to dive in there and experiment a little bit. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
it's great. So you mentioned before we get to the lightning round, you mentioned just real quick about talking about the widgets, and the app, the browser app,
Yeah.
for iOS and Android. Obviously, on iOS now, some of the big news that recently happened is that you can make the DuckDuckGo browser your default
Hmm.
browser on iOS, which is great
Yep.
news. Um,
Sorry.
and I'm curious. I also noticed that on which I have it installed on my devices. I also noticed that you have a widget, which is now iOS 14 can take advantage of these widgets. The
Hmm.
question, asking for a bunch of friends, including myself, is: would it? Is it? Do you have any plans, DuckDuckGo, to make that widget more interactive? Because I know right now you tap on it, it opens the browser. It'd be really cool if you could just type in there and then do a search.
Yeah, I need to check, but I am more than happy to pass this on. Um, I think, as I'm sure you sort of saw when iOS 14 was released, it was a bit of a surprise to
Yeah.
developers.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, nonetheless, we were proud to be, I think, the one of the first, if not the first, to actually have an approved widget ready, despite the
You're definitely one
sort
of
of
the first because there's very little widgets available at the moment.
right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, like, I think that there's more work to be done on it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure, and uh, given we wanted to get something out, I'll check in with our folks on it, and appreciate the feedback as always. And we're always open to that stuff and want to make it as good as possible. But definitely up against a lot of unexpected deadlines with that one.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you taking it back to the team for us and relaying
Yeah,
that because I think it would be a nice thing to be able to
for sure.
have kind of it's faster is really what it comes
Yeah.
down to.
No, it makes it, yeah, totally understand.
Nice. All right, so Camille, you made it through. This was great. I really liked this episode a lot. But you made it through all the way to the end of the lightning round, where we're gonna have some fun. So whenever you're ready, you let me know.
Okay.
We'll get started.
Boy, nothing. Yeah, I'm ready to go. I was gonna make
Take
some
a
sort
couple
of
deep
like
breaths.
lightning strike joke, like I'll put my umbrella away or something. But I'm ready for it. I'm just ready for the lightning. Let's
All right,
do
here
it.
we go. All right. If someone narrated your life, who would you want to be the narrator?
Oh my God. If someone narrated my life, who would I want to be the narrator? First thing that popped into my head was RuPaul.
Who? Oh, RuPaul from
Yes, from
Okay.
Drag Race.
Nice.
I'm a humongous fan of RuPaul's Drag Race. I think that it manages to, um, you know, both have a really important message of inclusivity, and mutual respect,
Mm-hmm.
while also not sort of being watered down and like sort of overly sort of fluffy and
Mm-hmm.
in a way that can be condescending. Um, I love that, I don't have children, but like I feel like if I did, even though they curse and do crazy things, I would be fine for them to watch it because I think there's an authenticity and honesty there um, that's so great. And
Yeah. That's
I
one of the
think,
things that we've
yeah.
been kind of preaching here at Best Techie recently, which is just being more authentic And I think authenticity is critical to just everything going forward these days. Like that's going to happen in the future. People just need to be
Yeah.
authentic with one another, and I yeah, I couldn't agree more. What's the
Yeah.
most recent show you've binged watched?
Oh gosh, the most recent show I've been watched, and my colleagues at DuckDuckGo are aware because I talk about it all the time, is Alone, which is
Alone,
on the
okay.
History Channel. Have you heard of it before?
I haven't. What's that about?
So on Alone, they take 10 people, okay, and they take them to a very remote area. So, and they've gone to Antarctica, they've gone to British Columbia, they've gone to Patagonia. 10 people, drop them off separately, and they're basically left there to survive off of 10 items, uh, with nothing else. They record themselves, and it's basically a survival competition.
Wow.
And my wife and I, got totally obsessed with it over quarantine, and watched multiple seasons of it. It is totally thrilling, very real, and something I'd recommend to everybody.
I'm gonna have to check
It's
that
I
out. It
think it's
sounds
also
super
funny
interesting.
because yeah, and both my wife and I are real city kids. We both grew up in
Hmm.
New York City,
Yeah.
and so there's a real sort of sense when someone's like boiling water to make it clean. You're like, oh, okay,
I see
that's
how to
how
do
that
that
happened.
now.
Now, wow, like there are a lot of sort of things we were ashamed we didn't understand that have been explained since, but also things that we would never want to do, like
Right.
eat bugs or,
Hmm.
hunt a squirrel, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. What word do you always misspell?
Oh, I'm a horrendous speller. Um, and so, I mean, gosh, there are so many. I feel like I misspell accident constantly.
For me,
Um,
it used to be
yeah, what's
entrepreneur.
yours?
Up until like somewhat recently, I figured out how to spell it. I don't know why. I
No
always mixed
chance.
up the E's
Entrepreneur,
and the
I'll spell it right.
U's.
Oh my God, it's just I just sort of bang the keyboard at that part and then end in
Yeah,
R and
and then
hope that
just
it's
right click
close.
spell check. Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, horrendous speller.
If you could acquire one skill without any effort, what would it be?
Dunking a basketball.
That's a cool one.
That
I
would
was
be,
thinking like for
yeah.
me, maybe I was
You
thinking
can
like
tell I've thought of
singing.
that.
Yeah, the way you came back to it so quickly makes me think that you have thought about that.
Yeah,
All
yeah,
right,
I definitely
last
have it.
one. Would you rather read minds or teleport? Would you rather be able to read minds or teleport? Sorry.
Definitely read minds. Uh,
Cool.
I mean, it's an interesting question. The reason I would want to be able to read minds is to, you know, yeah, I generally think empathy is the best way to sort of
Mm-hmm.
like understand and communicate with people, and so being able to read minds would hopefully help. However, thinking about it more, you know, just understanding how someone thinks doesn't mean you can reach them. So,
That's true. That's true.
so maybe I would want to teleport out of there instead of continuing the
Yeah.
conversation. I don't know.
I'm
Yeah,
done with this
that's
conversation.
tough.
See you later.
Yeah. What about you? What's your call?
For me, I think I'd go with teleport. I just can't get over how cool that would be. I don't have to be able to read someone's mind to like, you know, see what they're thinking about me or somebody else or whatever. Um, I mean, sure, I think it would be helpful at times, but also I feel like it could be inundating if you can't turn it off.
Yeah.
Something to be
Totally.
able to.
Or just like
So
you read someone's mind, it's total emptiness, which would not be helpful and
no, it
probably
would
what really
not.
happened. And teleporting in a global pandemic would be ideal. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I think I've officially changed my mind.
Okay,
Teleporting is my
I'm
answer.
glad we
Final answer.
changed your mind over to teleport. I think that's a good
Yeah,
choice. Very cool.
for sure.
Well, Camille, it's been great having you on. I really enjoyed this episode. I'm so glad you were on and we did the video, which is great. I think it's going to come out great. But yeah, so if anyone who's listening wants to get in touch with you or learn more about DuckDuckGo, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, I would, suggest everyone if you're, to sort of pick up your phone now and download the DuckDuckGo app. If anyone's looking to reach me, I'm on Twitter at Kamyl Bazbaz, my name. I love it. You love
I'm
to see
holding
it.
my phone up to the camera where I have the custom purple
Yes,
DuckDuckGo icon
love the purple.
in my iOS bar dock or
Love
whatever
it.
they call it.
That's great. Yeah,
Very
so
cool.
yeah, so I mean, and we're at our blog is Spread Privacy. People can learn more at duckduckgo.com. And if anyone has thoughts or feedback for us, always open to it.
Nice. And I would definitely recommend you guys check out their blog because there's a lot of really, really good information on it about how DuckDuckGo differs and also what their features and their functionality, how you can use it, get the most out of it, all that stuff. They write about it on their blog pretty much daily, I think, or so. And just a lot of good information there. So definitely recommend checking that out.
Thanks, Jeff.
Well,
Thanks so much. Appreciate that.
all right. Well, thanks, Camille. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I look forward to keeping in touch.
Likewise. All right. Thank you so much. Enjoy this.
See you later.
Take care.